They're all here?
Yes, sir.
We'll let the record reflect the defendant's present with his attorney as well as counsel for the state. Does either the state or the defense have anything we need to address before we bring in the jury?
No, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Have you had sufficient time to review the documents that you wanted to look at?
I have, Your Honor. Thank you.
Very well. All right, if you'll bring them in, please. All right, very well. I see all members of the jury are present. We're ready to proceed. You may resume with your examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Agent Hill.
Good afternoon.
So on the scene at Woodcrest and Meadowbrook, that's an intersection is where the crime scene tape was when you arrived?
Yes, sir. It's a T intersection.
Okay. Within that intersection, is that where you found, did you actually retrieve the 5 shell casings that were offered into evidence?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Within that, did you have an opportunity to photograph the scene?
Yes, sir, I
out
did.
there and place placards at the scene?
Yes, sir.
Where you found the evidence and take
Yes, sir.
pictures of that. And other than I believe you said other than the 5 shell casings, you documented finding, I think, 1 or 2 pieces of plastic,
Yes, sir. 2.
as well as a cigar.
Yes, sir. Unwrapped black and mild cream cigar.
And also, did you notice an area of blood?
Yes, sir, I did.
Was there 1 spot or 2 spots, or do you recall?
The spot I noticed was 1 spot. It was actually on Meadowbrook, just south of the intersection, right at the edge of the intersection.
And that was like an area where blood had pooled?
It was a small, but yes, sir.
About how large a spot would you say?
Maybe a couple inches.
And do you recall in relation to that spot where you found the shell casings?
3 of them I found actually in the middle of the intersection, which was probably 15 feet away. And then there was a damaged shell casing, which when I say damaged, it kind of got flattened. That was found probably within a few feet of the blood spot. And then a 5th shell casing was found on the shoulder of the road, kind of about the same position, but just on the shoulder of the road to the intersection. So it's kind of like right on the very edge of the intersection.
About the same position as the blood spot?
Yes. You look at a T intersection, and you got 3 corners of the intersection. The blood spot was kind of like right on the edge of the intersection, and then the shell casing was on the shoulder, pretty much same positioning on that street, but just on the shoulder of the road.
So in relation to what you described, there were 3 shell casings in the middle of the intersection,
Yes, sir.
and they were pretty close together?
Yes, sir. Probably within a couple feet of each other.
And then I think you said 15 feet or so
Yes, sir. Probably roughly.
to the blood spot?
Well, the 3 shell casings were kind of in the center of the intersection. The blood spot was about 15 feet away from that center, on the south side of that intersection. And then the damaged shell casing was probably within a couple feet of that, right kind of on that side of the intersection. And then the 5th shell casing was on the shoulder road, probably no more than 10 or 15 feet from the blood spot.
And the one that was damaged, that was within a couple feet of the blood spot, and in relation to the other 3, was it about the same distance as the blood spot from the other 3? Or?
Roughly, somewhere about 15 feet.
And then the one that you described that was on the shoulder?
Was probably about another 10 feet from that one.
And that was further from the 3 or closer to the 3?
Probably further.
Okay, so maybe 25 feet roughly from the other 3 shell casings?
Roughly, yes, sir.
Did you happen to take measurements that night of any?
I did not.
Of the location of these items? Thank you. That's all the questions I have, Your
Let me
Honor.
redirect.
Yes, sir. Since we're asking about the location of my approach, Your Honor,
Yes, sir, you may.
let me hand you back, what was introduced as Exhibit 78 through 82. Do you recognize as those casings that we dealt with just a little while ago while you were on the stand?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And using our exhibit numbers now, let's specifically make sure we're clear about where they were all found. So if 3 are basically together in the intersection, which 3 are those? Which numbers?
State Exhibit 78, 79, and 80.
Okay. So 79 through 78, I'm sorry.
78 through 80.
Together in intersection. And how about State Exhibit 81? Where was that found?
81 was the damaged shell casing that was located within a couple of feet of the blood spot on the south end of the intersection.
And then how about State Exhibit 82?
82 is the shell casing that was found on the shoulder of Meadowbrook on the west side.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Anything else for this witness, Mr. Cutler?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You may step down. Just want to return those.
Same?
And you may proceed.
Good afternoon, sir. Would you please tell this jury who you are and what you currently do for a living?
I am Christopher Adam Tanner. I'm a special agent with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. I'm currently assigned as a site safety officer within the clandestine drug lab program
What do you do as in that section of the SBI operations division?
Well, as part of, is the job of a site safety officer has many facets to it. Primarily it's safety. I am the agent responsible for aiding in the investigation of illegal drug labs. Generally around here it's methamphetamine labs. Assist in the investigation, also oversee the processing of the crime scene, the taking of samples for submission to the crime laboratory, the mitigation of the hazardous materials present, and the overpacking and transport away of those materials for their ultimate disposal.
Back in certainly the beginning of 2013, but basically through that year, through all of 2013, was that your assignment within the State Bureau of Investigation?
It was not. I took that position in October of 2013.
Okay. Prior to October then of 2013, what were you doing?
I was a senior firearm and tool mark examiner in the North Carolina State Crime Laboratory in Raleigh.
And how long did you do that?
I started in the firearms unit in May of '99 as a technician. I was promoted to examiner in August of 2001 and performed those duties until October of 2013.
And what kind of training or education do you have which qualifies you to be a firearm and tool market examiner for the SBI or for the crime lab, I should say?
Well, while I do have a bachelor's degree, the training that I received in the field of firearm and tool mark identification was what I received during the course of my employment. I completed a structured and tested training program that can last about 2 years, and it covers a broad range of topics from the identification of ammunition and ammunition components, the identification of firearms as to make, model, and country of origin, the microscopic examination of fired bullets, cartridge cases, and shot shells to determine if they were or were not fired by a particular firearm, gunshot residue testing for the purposes of distance determination, serial number restorations, gun function testing, crime scene reconstruction. And since completing training, you continue to add to that training by attending classes, seminars, and armorers courses.
How long in your duties there were you actually classified as either senior examiner or supervising analyst?
The senior examiner is what they term a forensic scientist 3, and I am honestly unsure how long I held that position.
Was it over a couple of years?
Oh yes, way more than 2 years.
Have you had the occasion to come to court to testify as an expert in this field of firearms examination identification before?
Yes.
Do you have any idea how many times you've done that?
Approximately 61 times in state and federal court.
As a firearms examiner, have you had the occasion when you work there in the laboratory to receive items of evidence to include ballistics type evidence of casings and projectiles to try and compare them with a weapon that it may have fired that projectile?
Yes.
Do you have any idea how many times you've conducted that kind of analysis?
Hundreds.
Okay. Thanks, sir. State would ask that he be allowed to testify as an expert in this field of firearms examination and identification.
Mr. Cutler, do you want to take him on voir dire or object to his being tendered as an expert?
No, Your Honor.
Members of the jury, in my discretion, I'm going to allow this witness to testify in the form of an opinion in the field of firearms examination and analysis, and ultimately it's you, the members of the jury, that will determine what weight and credibility you give to each and every witness, whether it's someone who's offered as an expert or the lay witnesses. So, as I say, in my discretion, he will be allowed to testify in the form of an opinion. Mr. Sachs, you may proceed.
Agent Tanner, during your work with the crime lab here in North Carolina, did you have the occasion to receive some firearms evidence pertaining to a homicide that occurred at 708 Colonial Drive here in Wake County back in January of 2013?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of you receiving those either firearms or ballistics types of evidence?
The purpose would be the same as any firearms case, would be to take the items given, whether they be fired items of evidence, cartridge cases, or projectiles, and the firearms submitted to determine, one, did the firearms function correctly, and were or were not those items fired from those given firearms.
And did you do that in this particular case?
Yes.
for how many different firearms?
I believe I received a grand total of 4 firearms and a pistol barrel.
Before we get into the actual analysis in this particular case, would you explain to this jury what you're looking for when you're trying to determine whether either fired projectile or casing is fired from a particular firearm?
Well, we look for 2 things. One is class characteristics, and that's the first item that you look for. Class characteristics are technically those measurable or discernible features of a specimen that indicate a restricted group that it belongs to. It's no different than automobiles. You know, Ford is going to sit down to make a car. They're going to determine how many doors that car is going to have. It's going to be 2 doors or 4 doors. What color paint are we going to use? You know, what kind of interior is that vehicle going to have? Those are class characteristics in that they were determined prior to that automobile ever being made. Firearms have class characteristics. When a manufacturer sits down to make an arm, they first get to decide, is it going to be a long gun or a handgun? What caliber is it going to be? If we get more specific into the rifling of the arm, which are those longitudinal grooves that run the length of the bore and spiral around its interior, you know, they get to determine the number of lands and grooves and their direction of twist and their relative width. These are all class characteristics that were decided long before that weapon was ever produced. So you can look at items fired from a firearm, and you can look and determine its caliber. You can measure its rifling characteristics, and then you compare those to the weapons that you were submitted. Because if the class characteristics do not agree, then that bullet or that cartridge case could have never been fired in that weapon. And there's no need to compare further. In the event that the class characteristics all agree, you go to the next step, which is a microscopic comparison using a comparison microscope, which simply allows you to view 2 objects side by side in the same plane but magnified. And then you look for the next thing that we look for as examiners, and those are individual characteristics. Individual characteristics arise secondary from the manufacturing process. They're random imperfections and irregularities that are formed during the manufacturing process itself as the tools are being machined. These individual characteristics can then be changed over time through use, abuse, wear, and it's these random imperfections and irregularities on the tool surface. And a firearm is nothing more than a tool. It's an assortment of tools brought together to accomplish the goal of discharging a cartridge. Those imperfections and irregularities will then impart themselves onto the softer metal of the bullets and cartridge cases. And then as an examiner, you can look at those resulting marks along with test specimens, controls that you generate with the firearm itself, to look for those individual characteristics to be present.
Is that the type of analysis that you did with respect to the evidence that you received in this particular case?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, may I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, sir, you may.
Be the one. First of all, let me show you what's been previously marked by identification here as State's Exhibit number 4. Do you see the red sticker with the 4 on it?
I do.
First of all, ask if you can recognize and tell us what that is.
I do recognize the item.
How so?
Well, the item bears my markings in addition to a bunch of other markings. It bears my initials, the laboratory case number, the item number that it was given to it when it came into the laboratory, the item number that I assigned it, the dates I received the package, the date I opened it, and the date that I sealed this package back.
Okay. And as you look at that box with all those markings on it, does it appear to contain one of the firearms that you received into evidence in this particular case to analyze?
It does.
Okay. And that box is now currently open, correct? It's not in a sealed condition right now, is it?
That's correct. It's open.
That's fine. Feel free to open it, and please look at the firearm in it. Can you recognize the firearm itself?
I do.
How so?
Well, I can recognize it because underneath the trigger guard, engraved into the metal itself is the item number that I gave it, in addition to my initials, and then my laboratory case number. And those same markings are on the safety bands that I placed around the charging handle.
Okay. Tell the jury, because we had some information earlier about there was some extra twist ties or something in the chamber there that wasn't there originally. What did you do to these weapons once you finished working with them?
Well, when I finished working them, I wanted it to be readily apparent to the next officer of the court that were to open this package that this firearm is unloaded. So I try to put it in a condition to where it's going to be readily apparent that it's safe. And one of the ways to do that is to lock this breech open, because if you hold the bolt back, well, then it's not going to be able to fire. So I threaded safety ties through the magazine well and out the side of the receiver through the ejection port and kind of zip tied that charging handle back.
Okay. So was that something that you did to this weapon?
Oh yeah, I did that. And the safety ties bear my initials.
Okay. All right. Since you had that item up and it's already been introduced into evidence, can you tell us what that weapon is that's marked State Exhibit number 4? What is that?
State Exhibit number 4 is a Century Arms caliber 7.62 by 39 millimeter semi-automatic rifle. Serial number KMS05649. It's a model AKMS.
Is that a weapon that we might commonly be known as an AK-47?
That's kind of the title assault weapon is kind of up to debate. It depends on one's definition, but yes, it could be construed as that.
Okay. When you received this particular weapon into your laboratory for analysis, did you inspect it to see if and how it functioned?
I did.
Does it function properly?
In regards to the K3 rifle, I do have that it functions properly.
Okay. Now, also, when you receive that particular item, how do you actually go about then to determine whether that weapon would have fired some either casings or projectiles that were recovered from a crime scene?
Well, once you examine the item and make sure that it is safe to fire, like you don't see broken or missing components, there's not a big crack down the side of the barrel, it's not warped or twisted or anything that would make it unsafe to fire, we actually take it down and discharge it to get samples. Items that I know were fired from this gun because I myself fired them.
Are those located in that box that's marked State Exhibit number 4?
They're taped in an envelope and in a plastic bag and taped to the inner lid of the box.
I may approach, Your Honor.
You may.
So I'm marking that little plastic bag taped there as Exhibit number 4A. Do you see that sticker on the 4A there?
Yes, sir.
So what is State Exhibit 4A?
State Exhibit 4A are the 3 test fires that I produced. It's the resulting fired cartridge cases and the resulting fired bullets.
And these are some of the projectiles. Let me hand you over here what's been previously introduced as State Exhibits 18 through 24. Do you recognize what those are?
I do.
What are those?
They are fired projectiles.
Okay. And did you receive those items as potential items of evidence in this particular case?
I did.
Okay. Can I approach again, Your Honor?
You may.
Let me hand you one other group. It's marked State Exhibits 25 through 29. Do you recognize those?
I do.
What are those?
These are more fired projectile and projectile fragments.
As part of your analysis in this particular case, did you compare the projectiles that you test fired from State Exhibit number 4 and located in State Exhibit 4A now, to compare them to some of these items marked State Exhibits 18 through, what is that, 29? Yes, through 29.
Yes, I received them for comparison.
Okay. What did you find when you did that comparison?
Are you referring to them all this time?
Yes, sir.
Well, I determined that
With respect, I'm sorry, with respect to this weapon, State Exhibit number 4.
Oh, these items were not fired from Stakes Exhibit number 4.
That's what I was asking. And how were you able to determine that?
Well, class characteristics. The majority of the items here that are not fragments, that are intact bullets that have clearly discernible lands and grooves, they have 4 lands and grooves with a right-hand direction of twist, wherein Stakes Exhibit number 4 has 6 lands and grooves with a right-hand direction of twist. So they can never have been fired in that weapon. And those that are just fragments have lands and grooves that are markedly different, enough so that it allows for an elimination, as to Stakes Exhibit number 4 having been the source.
Okay. May we approach again, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
5. Switch. And you now, with marked identification as State Exhibit number 5. Do you see that red sticker with the 5 on the front of that?
I do.
What is that?
Stakes Exhibit number 5 is a Mad-Eye caliber 7.62 by 39 millimeter semi-automatic rifle, serial number CM07037, and it's a model MISR-10.
Okay. And have you seen that weapon before?
I have.
How do you know?
Well, the box bears my markings, the same as Stakes Exhibit number 4 does. Also, the firearm itself is engraved on the bottom of the trigger guard with the item number that I gave this, which in this case is K-1, my initials, and my laboratory number.
Okay. And again, just like we did with Stakes Exhibit number 4, can you tell us about this weapon, how it appears, and what you found just from an initial examination of the weapon itself?
From the initial examination, I noted that the wood had been painted a pink shade, but that it has either was painted very lightly or was well worn. In addition, it had some damage to it. One of the upper guards is broken. Some of the wood is broken away. In addition, the majority of these arms were imported. The MISR-10 were imported to take single stack limited capacity magazines, 5 to 10 rounds. However, this one will accept and function with higher capacity stagger column magazines.
I think inside that box you'll find 2 magazines marked State Exhibits 5B and 5C. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do those magazines fit this weapon that's marked State Exhibit number 5?
They will fit and they will function with it.
Okay. And when you actually test fired this weapon, did you use those magazines?
I tested them both into the firearm.
Okay. We also have some photographs where those 2 magazines were actually taped together. Does that have any effect on the functionality of either the weapon or the magazines as it's used if an extra magazine is taped to one?
I don't have indications in my notes they were taped together when I received them.
Right.
So I don't know the user's intent. As long as they weren't taped far enough together, they need to be offset, or else you won't be able to get one into the magazine well. Sometimes people will use couplers to actually bind magazines together, and I believe their intent is to just aid in reloading.
And
But I would
believe-
have no idea in this case while that was done.
Right, and I believe the couplers you're talking about, you actually saw in the magazines for Stakes Exhibit number 4, correct?
Correct.
The, again, were you able to test fire this particular weapon that's marked Stakes Exhibit number 5?
Yes,
Does it function properly?
it does.
After getting some projectiles and casings from this particular weapon, were you able to compare them to the items that we have marked over there as Stakes Exhibits 18 through 29?
Yes.
What did you find when you did that?
My opinion in regards to Stakes Exhibit 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24 was that the projectiles were fired from Stakes Exhibit 5.
And how did you come to that conclusion?
It's a comparison of the class and individual characteristics that I discussed earlier.
How about the those remaining projectiles that I have there that were listed as Stakes Exhibits 25 through 29?
My opinion in regards to Stakes Exhibit 25, 26, 28, and 29 was that there is agreement of some class characteristics and some agreement of individual characteristics between Stakes Exhibits 25, 26, 28, and 29 and test bullets fired from the K1 rifle. However, the agreement is insufficient to identify these items as having been fired from Stakes Exhibit 5.
So is that just a way of saying they may have been fired, but there's just not enough for you to say for sure?
That is correct. The remaining state exhibit number, item number 27, my conclusion was that there is agreement of some class without agreement or disagreement of individual characteristics between Stakes Exhibit 27, which is a jacket fragment, and test bullets from the K1 rifle due to an absence, insufficiency, or a lack of reproducibility. Therefore, it cannot be determined whether or not Stakes Exhibit 27 was fired from K1.
Okay. All right. Very good. I'm going to help you keep from getting too confused. Let me take the projectiles back. Let me hand you previously introduced into evidence as Stakes Exhibits 33 through 61. Ask you to look through those for a moment so you can tell what those are. marked State's Exhibits 33 through 61?
I can.
What are those?
They're Ulanovisk brand, caliber 7.62 by 39 millimeter fired cartridge cases.
Okay. And did you receive all 29 of those casings to, as part of the evidence in this particular case, to see if you could compare it to a weapon for identification purposes?
I did.
Okay. And specifically, after you received the weapon that's marked as State's Exhibit number 5 and the test fires that are marked now as Exhibit 5A, were you able to make any kind of determination as to whether or not this weapon that State's Exhibit number 5 fired the cartridges that resulted in the casings that are State's Exhibits 33 through 61?
I did reach an opinion
And what is that opinion?
that these state's exhibit numbers, I believe 33 through 61, were fired in the state's exhibit number 5 rifle.
Could you explain to the jury, you already talked about the projectiles, talking about those things. Explain to the jury for a casing, since we're talking about those now. What are you looking for on the casing to make that determination?
Casings generally more easily discernible. I mean, for usually clearly stamped on casing, which is the back side where the primer is. And it's what we call a head stamp, where the manufacturer generally puts their name or an abbreviation for their name or a symbol that represents their name along with the caliber designation of that cartridge. In addition to that, the metals that make up the cartridge case are much softer than the parts of the firearm that they come into contact with. So during the tens of thousands of pounds of pressure generated during the firing process, those imperfections and irregularities on the surfaces of the breech face, the firing pin, the extractor, the ejector, the chamber, all those are stamped into the surface of that metal, and it leaves a signature that we can go back and compare the individual characteristics from our test fires to those items suspected of having been fired from a suspect firearm.
And did you do that in this particular case?
Yes.
And the cartridges from the test fires, are those some of the items that are located in what's now marked as State Exhibit 5A? I'm sorry, the test fires. Are they marked in that one? Nope.
They are not.
Want me to approach, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
So let me hand you now what's been marked by State's for identification as State Exhibit number 5D. Did that come out of this box, marked State Exhibit number 5 as well?
It did.
And what is that?
These are the test fires that I produced using State's Exhibit number 5.
And when you did the analysis that you talked about with both the projectiles and the casings, did you use the test fires that are located there in State Exhibit 5D to make that identification?
I did.
And when you looked at those casings that you just talked about, are those the casings that you use in 5D to compare with the casings from the scene that were in 33, State Exhibits 33 through 61?
Yeah, these test fires are the ones that I use for comparison.
Your Honor, I'd move then to introduce State Exhibit 5D into evidence.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
It's admitted.
While we're there, Your Honor, I also move to introduce State Exhibit 4A, which is with the test fires from the other weapon into evidence as well.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
They're admitted as well.
Again, on this weapon, you were talking earlier how there's a different magazine that is normally associated with this particular weapon. Is that right?
That is correct.
Where is it that you're showing where it's either been modified or changed some way to accept a different kind of magazine?
That area is right here, which is called the magazine well, which For the models of this firearm that were imported to accept limited capacity magazines, the magazine well opening is narrower because the 10-round magazine is a single column, which means the cartridges are stacked one on top of another. Therefore, the magazine itself isn't as wide as these staggered column magazines.
Looking at States Exhibits 5B and 5C, which are the magazines with it, are those stacked or staggered magazines?
They're staggered,
Okay.
which
And-
just means the cartridges are offset from one another to increase the capacity of the magazine.
Okay. And so how would one go about trying to do that, trying to modify that if the staggered magazine doesn't fit in there? How would you change that to make them fit?
Well, one step in the process is to grind down the opening to the magazine well, therefore enlarging it.
And is that what has appeared to have happened in this particular weapon?
Well, the inner surface of the magazine well appears ground and it's uneven.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Before I bring something new, let me take some of this away so that you don't get confused. So let me hand you what's been now introduced into evidence in State's Exhibit number 6. You see the red sticker with the 6 on there. Did you see that? I'm sorry.
I did, sir.
Okay. What is that?
State's Exhibit number 6 is a Haskell caliber .45 auto semi-automatic pistol, serial number of which has been obliterated. It's a model JS45.
And is that one of the weapons that you also received in your lab to analyze in this particular case?
Yes.
And first of all, like we did with the other 2 weapons, can you tell us some of the characteristics or some of the function capabilities of this particular weapon?
It's a semi-automatic pistol that I cannot remove from the box due to the safety tie.
If there are some scissors, I think, up there on the stand with you, feel free to use those.
Did you have any question in particular about?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, first of all, does it function properly?
Yes.
Okay. And how about the difference? You've shown us 2 of these 7.62 rifles and how they work. How would that differ, if any, from the way that this or any other handgun would function?
Well, for one, this is a handgun as opposed to a rifle. It shoots a much smaller caliber cartridge. It's a semi-automatic pistol, which means it'll discharge 1 round with each squeeze of the trigger. It is a blowback operated firearm.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there's generally 2 ways to make a semi-automatic handgun. There's 2 basic mechanisms we see. The simplest and usually the cheapest one to make is a blowback operated system, as opposed to the more technically advanced or recoil operated semi-automatic pistols.
In this particular weapon, did you receive it to try and determine whether or not some of the other ballistic evidence from these scenes matched this particular weapon?
Yes,
And did you do that analysis?
I did.
Okay. First of all, if I may approach, Your Honor.
Yes, sir, you may.
Few projectiles that eventually match.
First of all, let me hand you what's marked for identification as State Exhibits 30 through 32. Can you tell us what those are?
They are two .45 caliber fired copper jacketed bullets and one bullet jacket fragment.
And did you conduct any test fires from the weapon there, the Haskell .45 caliber handgun that's before you as State Exhibit number 6?
I did.
And are those test fires in that box with that weapon?
They are.
I may approach, Your Honor.
You may.
Sir, let me hand you now what's marked as State Exhibit number 6A. Are those test fires that you made from that particular weapon?
They are.
And when you compared those test fires in State Exhibit 6A to the items in State Exhibits 30 through 32, what did you find?
That these items were not fired from State Exhibit number 6.
And yet, let me change that sticker real quick. I think we have a 6A already. I'll just cover that spot. Make that 6B. Is that still the bag with your test fires in it?
It is.
And again, just so the record's clear, when you compared those test fires that are in State Exhibit 6B with those projectiles in States Exhibits 30 through 32, what did you find?
That they were not fired from the State's Exhibit number 6 pistol.
Okay. Let's go with the casings then. States Exhibits 64 through 74. Do you recognize those?
I do recognize them.
What are those?
They're CBC brand or Magtech caliber .45 auto fired cartridge cases.
And did you notice anything distinctive about each of these cartridge cases?
The head stamps were damaged.
How so?
They were ground or scratched to varying degrees.
Could you read either the manufacturer's name or caliber on the back of any of those head stamps on any of those casings?
There were some that had it partially visible, but I was still able to determine the manufacturer because CBC sometimes uses a primer stamp, which is a symbol that they put on to the primer itself as opposed to the case head or in addition to the marks they put on the case head. And it appears to be a V with a flat bottom, or what I call a flat top pyramid.
Okay. And did you see that mark in all these fired casings?
Yes.
Okay. Was that almost kind of like a class characteristics that you were talking about before?
Well, it's indicative of that manufacturer.
As you looked at the casings that you had fired from this weapon in State Exhibit 6B, were you able to compare them to the casings that are there in State Exhibit 64 through 74?
Could you repeat that?
Sure. Did you compare your test fires that you made from this weapon, which are now in State Exhibit 6B, to those casings that are in State Exhibit 64 to 74 to determine whether or not this weapon fired those casings?
I didn't need to because I'd compared these items to a different state's exhibit number and found that they were in identification to that other state's exhibit pistol.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Let me hand you now what's marked for identification as State Exhibits 78, 79, and 80. Ask you to look at those. You recognize those?
I do.
What are those?
They are CBC or MagTech brand caliber 45 auto fired cartridge cases.
Are these some of the casings from the other case that you were just talking about?
Yes.
Explain to the jury what happened when you received these items.
I generated a total of 6 case reports, 3 from 2 separate file numbers, and I received these in a different laboratory case number, which was R2013-00595. And when I received these items, I compared them to the fired items and to the handguns that I received in the original laboratory case number, which was 00594, and made comparisons.
And what did you find?
I found that these items,
And when you talk about these items, which items are you talking about?
States Exhibit 78, 79, and 80, that States Exhibit 78, 79, and 80 were fired in the States Exhibit K6 pistol, the Haskell 45 auto.
And that's what I was going to ask, so we don't start getting really confused with all the numbers. What brand name was that gun that we're talking about here?
It's a Haskell.
Your Honor, I move to introduce State Exhibit 6B into evidence at this time.
Any objections, Mr. Cutler?
No, Your Honor.
I'll receive them. Yes, sir, you may.
And you what's been now marked in evidence as State Exhibit number 7. Ask you to review that and see if you can tell us what that was.
States Exhibit number 7 is a High Point Firearms, caliber 45 auto, semi-automatic pistol, model JHP.
And were you able to determine whether or not that handgun functioned properly?
I did.
Okay. And were you able to conduct an analysis by making some test fires from that weapon to compare with some other ballistic evidence received in this particular case?
Yes.
And are those test fires located inside of that box marked State Exhibit number 7?
They are.
Do they already have a red sticker on them?
They do not.
Make that.
You may.
There's a 7A already.
B. Okay.
All right, sir. I've marked that bag with the test fires now as State Exhibit 7B. Did you have the occasion to compare those items in State Exhibit 7B with some of the other items then that was submitted to you in this particular case?
Yes.
Let's look specifically now at what I handed you, and you should still have up there as State Exhibits 30 through 32, which are those projectiles that you talked about earlier. Do you have those?
Yes.
Okay. Specifically with respect to your test fires from State Exhibit number 7 that are located in State Exhibit 7B, looking at those fired projectiles in State's Exhibits 30 through 32, did you reach any conclusion?
I did.
What was that?
The State's Exhibits 30, 31, and 32 were fired from State's Exhibit 7, the high point
The
pistol.
high point? Okay. Let's now go to the casings, which are to your right, I think, still in State's Exhibits 64 through 74. I'm going to ask the same thing. Looking at the test fires you made from the high point gun now, which are located in State's Exhibit 7B, did you compare them to those casings which are in State's Exhibit 64 through 74?
I did.
And after doing so, what did you find?
I found that State's Exhibits 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, and 74 were fired in the State's Exhibit 7 pistol, the high point.
Your Honor, I do introduce then State's Exhibit 7B into evidence.
Any objections?
There you are.
It's received.
Agent Tanner, at the end of all of this, what's the bottom line result from all your work that you potentially did in this case with respect to these weapons? For instance, the high point weapon. What did the high point weapon fire?
The high point weapon, State's Exhibit number 7, fired these cartridge cases, and in my opinion fired these 2 bullets and bullet fragments that are caliber 45.
Okay. And the Haskell handgun, what did you match that to?
3 fired casings from the separate shooting incident, the 00595 lab number.
And then with respect to the rifle, the Mad Eye, I think you called it, assault rifle, again, what was your conclusion with respect to what may have been fired or was fired from that particular weapon?
That the 7.62 by 39 millimeter fired cartridge cases were fired in that Mad Eye rifle.
Is that all the rifle cartridge cases that were submitted to you?
All the fired cartridge cases.
Yes, sir.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. All right. And I believe earlier you had matched up several projectiles to that rifle as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
At the end of all of that work, did you prepare some reports to document and record your findings in this particular case?
I did.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
84, 85, 86, so... What's been marked by identification as State's Exhibits 84, 85, and 86. Ask you to look at those for a moment. See if you can tell us what those are.
I can.
What are those?
There 3 of the 6 reports that I prepared in regards to these 2 separate cases. These relate to laboratory case number R2013-00594, which is listed as being a homicide.
So when you say 3 out of 6 report, I believe you said you prepared basically a double report for each finding because of these cases being related. Is that right?
That is correct. When someone asks for a cross comparison where you have items in one case and items in a separate case, and I make that comparison, I have to generate mirror imaged copies. So a report under this case number detailing the comparison from here to here, and then a report under this case number detailing the comparisons from here to here. And in this case, I was given 3 separate groups of evidence in each case, so that made for a total of 6 reports to complete the cross comparisons.
And just so that we're clear, even though we only have 3 of those reports here, is there any other report that you would have floating out there that has different information than pertaining really to this case, other than what's in State's Exhibits 84 through 86?
No.
Okay. Specifically, looking at State Exhibit 84 then, do you see your signature on the bottom of that report?
I do.
And does the State Exhibit 84 document your findings with respect to some of the ballistics comparisons you did, particularly with the result of the projectiles that were sent to you?
It does.
Okay. At the time that you completed or worked on the analysis that's contained in State Exhibit 84, did you have the high point weapon to analyze?
I did not.
Okay. So in State Exhibit 84, did you document all of your findings with respect to the other 3 weapons, that being the 2 rifles and the Haskell 45?
I did.
Okay. And in State Exhibit 85, at that time, were you then given the high point 45 weapon to analyze?
Yes.
And did you document then in State Exhibit 85 your findings with respect to that particular weapon?
In regards to the projectiles,
Just the projectiles?
just the projectiles, at the time State's Exhibit 85 was published, I had not the fired cartridge cases to compare.
Right. Okay. And then finally, in 86, because that's a good segue then into that, in 86, is that basically documenting your findings for all of these weapons with respect to the casings that were found in these particular scenes?
That is correct.
All right. And as you've testified here, did you document those findings in those reports marked State Exhibits 84, 85, and 86?
I did.
And are those true and accurate copies of your report regarding your findings in this particular case?
They are.
Your Honor, move then to introduce State Exhibits 84, 85, and 86 into evidence.
Any objections, Mr. Collar?
No, Your Honor.
There are received. Can I see them, please?
Thanks, sir. I don't think I have anything further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Afternoon,
Afternoon, sir.
Agent Tanner. May I approach and take a look at 85 and 6?
Here they are, all 3 of them.
My copies, I think, have the State's Exhibit numbers, if that would help you.
Okay. I'll let me just review these just a moment. Agent Tanner, I believe you testified that you were provided shell casings from another case. And I believe you said that number was 595?
Yes, sir, that would be the laboratory case number.
Okay. Let me just ask you this. I believe I don't know if you have states 78 through 82. I may approach them.
Yes, sir.
I believe you testified that you examined 78, 79, and 80. You recall that you compared those shell casings. Take a look at 78 through 82 and just familiarize yourself with those, please. Do you know where those, what's in 78 and 80 through 82?
These are CBC brand caliber 45 auto fired cartridge cases.
All right. Now, do you know where those came from?
I would have to try and find the laboratory submission sheet if they even indicated on it where they originated.
I believe Agent Hill testified earlier today that 78 through 82 were recovered from an intersection or in the roadway area between Woodcrest Drive and Meadowbrook.
I have marked on the packages Green Pine
Green Pine. Okay.
Drive.
So I understood that you examined those shell casings and compared them to the casings that were test fired from the 45 caliber weapons you had. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I think, as I understood, you testified that 78, 79, and 80 did come from, you did determine they came from one of the, or you believe, in your opinion, that they were fired in one of those weapons?
Yes, sir. In my opinion, 78, 79, and 80 were fired in the Haskell Stakes Exhibit number 6 pistol.
What about, did you determine if number 81 and 82 were fired in either of the pistols that were submitted?
I determined that Stakes Exhibit 82 and 81 and 82 were fired in the Stakes Exhibit number 7, the High Point pistol.
So, Your Honor, I believe it's in your report, it should be 83, that you testified as well. But looking at State Exhibit number 83, was that also used to compare with those two 45 caliber handguns that you've done your analysis in?
It was.
And basically, what is in State Exhibit number 83?
It's a caliber 45 fired copper jacketed bullet.
Okay. And is that a piece of item, that projectile or bullet, does that come from the homicide case, your 2013 number, or the other case from 2012?
It's the other case.
From 2012?
It's the laboratory case number 595.
Okay. And when you compared that to the test fires from each of these handguns, were you able to make a conclusion as to whether or not either one of those weapons fired that projectile?
Yes.
What did you find?
It is my opinion that State's Exhibit number 83 was fired from the K5 pistol, which I believe is the high point. State's Exhibit number 7.
So when I asked before, and my fault for not mentioning that before, but in our bottom lines kind of summary of the case, with respect to that other case, we have 3 casings that matched the Haskell firearm and 2 casings and a projectile that matched the high point. Is that
In my opinion,
in
yes.
your opinion? All right. And then that high point weapon that was introduced as State's Exhibit number 7, is that the 45 caliber handgun that your opinion was matched the ballistics from the homicide scene in January 2013?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all.
Anything else, Mr. Cutler?
Nothing else, Your Honor. Thank you.
Any other follow-up at all?
Yes.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's 5 o'clock. This is a good time for us to break for the evening. I'm going to release you until 9:30 tomorrow morning. Please keep in mind the rules. Don't talk about this matter among yourselves or allow anybody, to talk about it in your presence. Don't form any opinions about anything that you've heard, and don't conduct any research or investigation. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 9:30. I'm going to ask everyone to remain seated while the jury is excused. Let the record reflect that all members of the jury have left the courtroom. Anything else for the state before we adjourn?
No, sir. I think we had talked earlier about the schedule, and it's pretty apparent to me. We actually mailed today a lot of the forensic stuff. But I have 2 main witnesses left, but I still believe that it'll probably be Wednesday when we have the defense statement to deal with tomorrow, and we have that video that's, we'll talk about tomorrow. But we get barefoot in the stand tomorrow, and then Wednesday to have our medical examiner, and that should be near, if not the end of the state's case. So for planning purposes, trying to give as much notice as I can, but I think it'll be Wednesday.
All right. Started looking at jury instructions, and you have any special requests or whatever prior to the time we get to a charge conference, if you would provide those for me. It's easier for me to put things in and take them out later than it is to try to plug them back in as we go. Basically, it's easier to put everything on the table and then take them. But I think I'll have it with conference when we get to that point. Did you have anything, Mr. Cutler, that you wanted to address outside the presence of the jury?
No, Your Honor.
Very well, then we'll be adjourned till tomorrow morning at 9:30.
Hearing statements on reports.